All right, so get ready, folks, because this week we're diving into the deep end of history, exploring the dark side, the figures who are often labeled the evilest people in history.
Ooh, this is going to be good.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff.
It is, but it's important.
Yeah.
It's crucial.
And you've given me 2 sources to really dig into, a top 10 list.
That classic.
Yeah. And then this other list, and right off the bat, I noticed some differences, which is interesting in itself.
Absolutely.
It got me thinking about how we even define evil. Like, is it just a body count? Or is there more to it?
That's a fantastic question to start with because it's something historians really wrestle with.
Right.
It's not simple, right? You can't just put a number on it.
Exactly.
But we do look at things like the scale of suffering inflicted,
Right.
obvious, the violation of human rights, and the lasting consequences, like how did this change society's cultures?
Yeah, that ripple effect.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into some actual examples.
Yeah, let's do it.
Both of your sources put Hitler, Stalin, and Mao at the top, though the order's a little different.
A little bit, yeah.
Now, pretty much everyone knows Hitler and the Holocaust.
Right, yeah.
But he caused a lot more death than just that, didn't he?
Way more. So, yeah, the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, horrific.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, you've got World War II, which resulted in tens of millions more dying.
It's insane. Like the ripple effect you were talking about?
Yeah, just from one man's, I guess, ideology.
It's hard to wrap your head around that scale of destruction.
Yeah.
Then there's Stalin, who ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And what struck me about him is that his evil was more inward-facing, like toward his own people.
Yeah, it's a good distinction.
Yeah.
So Stalin's reign of terror was all about purging anyone that he saw as a threat,
Right.
whether they were or not.
Yeah.
It was forced famine, show trials, the Gulag labor camps. He systematically eliminated anyone who stood in his way.
So,
And the chilling part,
yeah.
a lot of this was driven by his own paranoia and lust for absolute power.
So it wasn't just like an ideology, it was personal.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
he wanted control.
Control, yep.
And then there's Mao Zedong, who led communist China.
Yeah,
His policies also led to a crazy amount of death.
they did. And with Mao, it's kind of fascinating, right, how ideology can be twisted to such horrific ends. Like,
Yeah.
his great leap forward was supposed to modernize China's agriculture.
Right?
It ended up causing this widespread famine and millions of deaths.
Yeah.
And then you have the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
So that was supposed to be about purging capitalist elements from society.
Right.
It turned into this just chaotic period of upheaval and violence. Millions persecuted, millions killed.
So we're seeing this theme of ideology and power like mixed together in all 3.
Definitely.
But the sources you gave me, even with these 3 at the top, the order is different.
It is, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, for one thing, trying to figure out death tolls from these periods is insanely hard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Historians debate constantly, right?
Yeah.
Different sources use different methods.
Right.
It's like a puzzle where you're missing pieces.
Yeah.
You're never going to get the full picture.
Yeah.
And then there's also this question of how you weigh different types of evil, right? Like, is a death from famine less evil than a death in a concentration camp?
Right. Yeah.
There are no easy answers there.
That's true. It makes you realize that trying to rank evil, even with these guys, is,
tricky.
yeah, not a simple equation at all.
Nope.
Let's shift gears a bit. Look at some individuals that are only on one list or the other.
Okay.
So Pol Pot, for example, he's on that top 10 list.
Yeah.
His regime in Cambodia was just notoriously brutal.
Oh, yeah.
Even if the scale was smaller than the others we've talked about.
Yeah, Pol Pot's inclusion is interesting because it shows how fast and intense evil can be.
Yeah.
So in just a few years, his Khmer Rouge regime orchestrated a Cambodian genocide. They targeted intellectuals, minorities, anyone they saw as an enemy.
It's scary how quickly that happened.
And what's even more chilling, right? It wasn't about conquering the world or spreading their ideology.
Right.
They wanted to create this agrarian utopia, whatever that meant.
Yeah.
And the human cost didn't matter to them.
So even within a relatively small country...
Huge consequences.
Yeah. Source 1 also focuses on some of the key players in the Nazi regime, Heinrich Himmler specifically.
Right.
What about him?
Himmler is a scary example of someone completely devoted to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So head of the SS, he was directly responsible for setting up that concentration camp system.
Oh, wow.
You could argue he was even more hands-on than Hitler when it came to actually carrying it all out.
It's crazy how many different levels of involvement there were.
Oh, absolutely.
From the dictator to the people carrying out the horrors.
Yeah.
And then it gets even more complex when we look at figures like Genghis Khan.
Oh, yeah.
He's on the top 10 list, but people admire him for his military genius.
They do. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put those two together.
Genghis Khan, it's a great example of, can we really judge historical figures by today's standards?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So his conquests, yeah, they were brutal, widespread death and destruction.
Yeah.
But that was a brutally violent era.
That's true.
Conquests like that were kind of the norm.
Yeah.
So looking back and judging him by what we think is right today, it's tricky.
So context is everything, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Speaking of different contexts, one figure on the second list stood out to me, Leopold II of Belgium.
Okay, yeah.
His reign over the Congo Free State was horrific.
It was.
But it wasn't through war or like political purges or anything like that.
Yeah, no, this is different.
It was different.
Leopold II, I mean, that's the dark side of colonialism on full display.
Yeah.
Millions died in the Congo, but not on a battlefield.
Right.
It was forced labor, mutilation, just this systematic oppression.
It's wild how different that is, like the approach.
Right. And it's driven by greed, pure and simple.
Yeah. Just disregard for human life.
Yeah.
It's different, but no less devastating.
Absolutely not.
And then source one also includes some modern figures, Osama bin Laden, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Jim Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Their crimes feel more individualized compared to the leaders we've talked about.
It's like we're looking at a spectrum of evil here, right?
Yeah.
On one end, you have dictators orchestrating mass death at a societal level.
Yeah.
Then on the other end, you've got individuals like bin Laden,
Right.
whose actions as the mastermind behind al-Qaeda
Right.
really brought terrorism to the forefront of like global consciousness.
And then there's Dahmer, whose crimes as a serial killer, the depravity.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, Jim Jones, the cult leader, the mass suicide at Jonestown.
It's like different flavors of evil.
Yeah.
Each one has its own like terrible set of ingredients.
Yeah.
But what's unsettling is that they all share this disregard for human life.
Yeah.
And this willingness to inflict suffering on others.
It's crazy. Like, whether it's for power or ideology or just some messed up personal thing.
It's disturbing.
Now, one thing that really jumps out from both lists is the lack of women.
That's interesting, yeah.
Does this mean women are incapable of, like, great evil?
That's a great question. And it goes back to how we understand both gender AD power.
Right.
Throughout history, women haven't held nearly as many positions of power
Yeah.
where they could commit these large-scale atrocities.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're incapable of evil,
Yeah, that's true.
just that they haven't had the same opportunities.
Okay, so it's more about societal structures than, like, some inherent difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so, women aren't off the hook here.
No, not at all. History's full of examples of women who did terrible things, abused their power within families, communities.
Right.
It's just that it often happened on a smaller stage, more hidden.
It's a good point. We can't let these lists make us think that men are the only ones capable of evil.
Right. Or that evil only happens in these, like, big, dramatic ways.
Absolutely. Evil can come from anywhere.
It can.
Yeah.
And, it's important to remember that these lists are just a starting point, right?
Right.
They get our attention, but they can't fully explain history. If we just reduce these complex people to a ranking,
Right.
we risk oversimplifying the past,
Right.
ignoring the big picture things that contributed to these atrocities.
Okay, so we've got to look beyond just the top 10, right?
Okay.
These lists are a starting point, but they're not the whole story.
Absolutely. We got to dig deeper.
We do, but we're going to have to take a little pause here.
Okay.
When we come back in part 2, we'll continue this exploration of, well, the dark side, and we'll delve into some of the specific figures that stood out to us, including Vlad the Impaler and Osama bin Laden.
Ooh, those are good ones.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Yes, stick around. Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were saying how these lists are interesting, but they can't capture just how complex evil is.
You're totally right. It's like, how can you really rank this stuff? But if we move away from ranking, like, how else can we approach this whole idea of evil when we're talking about history?
One way is to look beyond the individual people, right?
Yeah.
And look at the systems, the ideologies that let evil actually flourish.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it. Could Hitler have pulled off the Holocaust if the Nazi Party wasn't in total control?
Yeah.
Would Stalin's purges have happened without the Soviet Union's super strict structure?
Right. So you're saying it's not just T, the person, it's the whole environment around them.
Exactly. It's like you need the right ingredients and the right conditions for this stuff to take root and explode. Another thing we can do is try to understand why these people did what they did.
Yeah, like what was driving them?
Was it a hunger for power, a messed up ideology, maybe just straight up hatred?
Getting into their heads, huh?
Yeah, kind of like a psychological autopsy of history.
That's creepy, but I like it.
It can give us a glimpse into, like, the psychology of evil.
Yeah, I get it. But like you said before, we got to be careful not to make things too simple.
Right.
There's no one reason why someone becomes evil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's never that easy. We got to look at everything, all the things that might have pushed them that way.
Right.
And sometimes we might just never fully get it. The depths of human darkness, man, it's deep.
It's a scary thought. You know, I want to circle back to something I talked about before, the lack of women on those lists.
Okay.
You said women historically haven't had the same chance to do, like, huge, terrible things. But that doesn't mean they can't, right?
Absolutely not. Those lists might not have many women, but history is full of examples of women who were ruthless, who did cruel and violent things.
Like who? Give me some examples.
Queen Mary I of England. Bloody Mary, they called her. She went after Protestants big time during her reign.
Whoa.
And then there's Empress Wuzichin of China. She was all about power, getting it and keeping it no matter what.
Okay, so the scale might be different, but women can be just as bad as men.
Totally. And it shows us that we have to think broader about what evil even is. It's not just mass murder and genocide.
Right, it can be all sorts of things.
Abuse of power, cruelty within families, so much more.
It's everywhere in a way. Kind of disturbing.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's why studying this stuff matters.
Yeah.
We learn from the past, hopefully. By understanding what causes this evil, the things that let it grow, and the different forms it takes, we can maybe be better at seeing it and stopping it now.
So it's not just judging what happened before, it's about making things better now.
Exactly.
Okay, so back to that top 10 list. We talked about Genghis Khan and how hard it is to judge him by today's standards.
Right.
What about Vlad the Impaler? I mean, his name just sounds terrifying.
Vlad. He's a great example of how history can get twisted up.
What do you mean?
He was brutal, no doubt, and famous for harsh punishments.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the stories, like the impaling thousands of people thing, might be exaggerations or propaganda spread by his enemies.
So he wasn't as bad as the stories say.
Maybe. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But even if some stuff's made up, Vlad was ruthless.
Yeah.
He ruled through fear.
I can see why he's on the list.
And then you've got Osama bin Laden. I mean, his name, ISIS terrorism to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's like he changed how we think about evil in the 21st century.
Right. He wasn't a dictator with armies. He wasn't running a country.
Right.
But as the leader of Al-Qaeda,
Yeah.
he had huge impact, showed that one person can cause terror all over the world.
And he changed how we think about security, how countries work together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're way more vulnerable in a globalized world than we like to admit.
It's a whole different kind of evil we have to deal with now.
And the question is, how do we fight it? Old ways of doing things might not work against groups like Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it's a whole new ballgame.
And it shows that evil. It's not just in the history books. It's shaping our world right now.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
We're actually running out of time for part 2. When we come back for the final part, we'll talk more about those modern figures, Jeffrey Dahmer, Jim Jones, and try to figure out what, if anything, we can learn from these dark parts of history. Stay with us.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into some of the evilest people in history.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's been heavy, but it really makes you think.
It does, doesn't it? We've gone from dictators who, reshaped the world to people whose cruelty was more focused, but no less horrific.
And we've talked about some big questions along the way, like how do we even define evil?
Right.
How does the time and place matter?
Absolutely.
And can we actually learn from the past so we don't repeat it?
Big questions.
Yeah. It's like peeling back the layers of history, but also like human nature.
Yeah. And it's not always pretty.
No, it's not. Before we finish up, I wanted to get to a couple more figures from those lists.
Okay, yeah.
Jeffrey Dahmer and Jim Jones. Their crimes were different, more on an individual level, but still terrifying.
Those two, they really show us the dark side of the human mind, you know?
The things that can lead to just unimaginable acts.
Dahmer, the Milwaukee monster, he preyed on young men, did truly awful things to them.
Just unspeakable cruelty. And it showed us that Evil can be hiding in plain sight.
It's the cannibalism and necrophilia for me. It's
Yeah.
like, how do you even wrap your head around that?
It makes you realize that the human mind is a scary place sometimes.
It really does. And then there's Jim Jones. His story is like a warning about what happens when you just blindly trust someone, especially a charismatic leader.
Oh, yeah.
The Jonestown Massacre, over 900 people dead from drinking cyanide because he told them to.
It's one of the most tragic and confusing examples of cult deaths ever.
I mean, how did he have that much control over people?
That's the thing, isn't it? To make them commit mass suicide.
It's wild.
It shows how dangerous charismatic leaders can be, how they can twist people's beliefs for their own sick goals.
And that's still happening today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
All this misinformation online, these conspiracy theories.
People want easy answers. They want someone to tell them what to think.
Yeah, and that can be really dangerous.
More than ever, we've got to think for ourselves, question things, and be careful who we trust.
So that brings us back to our big question.
Yeah.
What can we learn from studying these dark parts of history? Is it just morbid curiosity?
Right.
Or can it actually help us in some way?
I think the biggest takeaway is that evil isn't some force out there separate from us.
Yeah.
It's a human thing.
Yeah.
It comes from our minds, how society is set up, the choices we make.
So we're all capable of it, in a way.
We have to understand the things that contribute to evil, both in individuals and in societies.
Yeah.
If we can spot the warning signs, maybe we can stop it from happening again.
So be more aware, right? Pay attention to how power works, how people try to manipulate each other.
Exactly. And we need more empathy, more compassion.
Yeah.
We have to see each other as human.
Right.
That doesn't mean we excuse evil or the people who do it,
Right, of course not.
but we try to understand what might have led them there.
It's like asking ourselves, what would it take for me to go down that path?
Exactly. What's stopping me from making those same terrible choices?
Whoa.
Deep. Right.
We can't just pretend these people are monsters and think, oh, I'd never do that.
Nope. Because we all have that potential for good and evil.
It's the choices we make, what we value, that make the difference.
You got it.
Well, this has been a deep dive, for sure.
It has.
And kind of scary. But it's good to remember that we have a choice. We can make things better.
I totally agree. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it.
Right.
By understanding the roots of evil, we can try to build a better world, a fairer world, a kinder world, a more human world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this journey, folks.
Thanks for having me.
It's been dark, but I think it's important. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep trying to make the world a better place. One choice, one action at a time.